The sound of laughter cut through the humid July air like a rusty blade. I watched from my beach chair, pretending to read a paperback thriller, while my wife Alison giggled like a teenager at something Bryce Carter had whispered in her ear. "Eddie, could you grab me another beer?" she called out, not bothering to look in my direction. Her attention remained fixed on Bryce, the golden boy realtor, who'd somehow inserted himself into our friend group over the past 6 months. I am Eddie Malloy, 39 years old, and I fix computers for a living. Not exactly the most glamorous profession, but it pays the bills and keeps food on the table for our 2 daughters. At least it used to be enough. "Get it yourself," I muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Alison's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up. She was still beautiful at 37, with the kind of polished look that came from expensive salon visits and a wardrobe that cost more than my monthly salary. Her law practice had been doing well lately, which meant she'd been treating me like hired help more often than not. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice carrying that dangerous edge I'd learned to recognize over 14 years of marriage. I said I'll get it in a minute. I folded my book and stood up, brushing sand off my swim trunks. The beach was crowded with families and couples enjoying the weekend, but our little section felt like a war zone. Bryce stretched out on his towel like some kind of bronze god, his perfect abs glistening with sweat and coconut oil. Everything about him screamed money and success, from his expensive sunglasses to the Rolex that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. "Actually, Allie, I think you missed a spot with your sunscreen," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Want me to help you out?" My wife practically purred. "That would be wonderful, Bryce. Eddie never remembers to help with my back." I stood there holding 2 beer bottles, watching my wife of 14 years arch her back as another man's hands roamed across her skin. The other couples in our group, the Hendersons, the Moores, and Jenny Morse with her latest boyfriend, continued their conversations as if nothing unusual was happening. But I saw the way Jenny's eyes flicked between Alison and Bryce, a strange smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Jenny had been Alison's best friend since college, and she had a talent for stirring up drama wherever she went. "There you go," Bryce said, his hands lingering a moment too long on Alison's shoulders. "Can't have you getting burned." "My hero," Alison giggled, and something inside my chest twisted like a knife. I'd been noticing things for weeks now, the way she'd started working late more often. The new clothes, the expensive perfume, the way she'd begun treating our marriage like an inconvenience. But seeing it play out in front of our friends in broad daylight was a new level of humiliation. "You know what?" I said, setting the beers down in the sand. "I think I'm done here." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Alison finally looked at me, her green eyes cold as winter ice. "What's your problem, Eddie? I just asked him to put sunscreen on my back. If you're so jealous, just go home." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, conversations had stopped. Everyone was staring now, waiting to see what I'd do next. "Maybe I will," I said quietly. "Fine," she snapped. "Take your attitude and go sulk somewhere else. We're trying to have fun." Bryce had the nerve to smirk at me. "Don't worry, Eddie. I'll make sure Allie gets home safe." I looked around at the faces of people I'd considered friends. Not one of them met my eyes. Not one of them said a word in my defense. "You do that," I said, and walked away. Back at the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. My hands were shaking, whether from anger or humiliation I couldn't tell. Probably both. I opened my laptop and booked a flight home for that evening. Then I pulled out a piece of hotel stationery and began to write. "Alison, by the time you read this, I'll be back in Millfield. I know about you and Bryce. I've known for weeks. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way you can barely stand to be in the same room as me anymore. I also know about the credit cards you've been hiding, the ones in your maiden name. $23,000 in debt for clothes, jewelry, and hotel rooms. I found the statements in your car. Enjoy your vacation. We'll talk when you get home. Eddie. I left the note on her pillow, grabbed my suitcase, and headed for the airport. My phone started buzzing before I'd even reached the terminal, but I turned it off without looking at the messages. The flight home gave me 3 hours to think, and by the time we landed in Boston, I'd made a decision. If Alison wanted to play games, I'd show her how the game was really played. I spent Sunday morning changing the locks on our house. It felt good to work with my hands, to focus on something concrete and productive, while my phone buzzed endlessly with ignored calls and messages. By noon, I'd packed all of Alison's belongings into boxes and stacked them neatly in the garage. Her clothes, her books, her expensive skincare products, everything that belonged to her went into cardboard containers labeled with black marker. Then I sat down at my computer and began my real work. The beauty of being in IT is that people underestimate you. They think you're just some guy who fixes printers and resets passwords. They don't realize that fixing computers means understanding how people think, how they make mistakes, and how they leave digital footprints everywhere they go. Alison had been sloppy. Her email password was our daughter Maya's birthday. Her social media accounts were all linked, and she'd been using our shared laptop to communicate with Bryce, probably thinking I'd never bother to check the browser history. I found everything: photos, messages, even hotel receipts. But more importantly, I found something that made my pulse race with possibility. Bryce owed money to Tony Marconi, the guy who ran the shadiest car dealership in 3 counties. A lot of money. My phone rang. Jenny's name appeared on the screen. Hello, Jenny. Eddie, thank goodness. Allie is going crazy trying to reach you. She's been crying all morning. Has she now? Look, I don't know what happened between you two, but she's my best friend. She says you just disappeared and left some horrible note. I leaned back in my desk chair, looking out the window at our quiet suburban street. Mrs. Harris was watering her flowers next door, and I could see her straining to hear my conversation through the open window. Did she tell you what she and Bryce were doing before I left? Silence on the other end of the line. Jenny? Eddie, I think you might be overreacting. Allie said you got upset about sunscreen. Sunscreen. I laughed, and it came out darker than I'd intended. Is that what she's calling it? Look, maybe you should call her. Work this out like adults. You're right. We should definitely work this out like adults. After I hung up, I opened my laptop again and began typing. If Alison wanted to play the victim, I'd give her an audience. I started with a group text to everyone who'd been at the beach. Nothing dramatic or accusatory, just a simple message. Thanks for a memorable weekend, everyone. Really opened my eyes. Then I waited. The responses came quickly. Concerned messages asking if everything was okay, if Alison had made it home safely, what had happened after I left. I responded to each one individually, always polite, always reasonable. Just a man who'd discovered his wife was having an affair and was trying to process the betrayal. I didn't have to embellish or exaggerate. The truth was damaging enough. By Monday evening, half the town knew that Alison Malloy was cheating on her husband with Bryce Carter. By Tuesday morning, the other half had heard about it too. Mrs. Harris knocked on my door around 10 o'clock, carrying a casserole dish and wearing her most sympathetic expression. Eddie, dear, I heard about your troubles. If there's anything I can do... That's very kind of you, Mrs. Harris. I'm managing okay. That wife of yours, she said, shaking her gray head, always thought she was too good for the rest of us. And now this business with that realtor boy. Shameful. I accepted the casserole and listened to her cluck disapprovingly for another 10 minutes. Mrs. Harris was the town's unofficial news network, and I knew that every word of our conversation would be repeated to at least a dozen other people before sunset. My phone rang as I was putting the casserole in the refrigerator. Alison's number. Hello, Allie. What have you done? Her voice was tight with panic. People are calling me, asking questions. My boss wants to see me first thing tomorrow morning. I haven't done anything except tell the truth when people asked. You're destroying my reputation. I think you managed that all by yourself. I just helped people connect the dots. Eddie, please. We need to talk about this rationally. I made a mistake, but we can work through it. A mistake, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you spend thousands of dollars on hotel rooms with another man? She was quiet for a long moment. How did you find out about the credit cards? I'm good with computers, remember? I'm good at finding things that people try to hide. Look, I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. Bryce and I were just friends. The hotels were for work conferences. Which work conferences require lingerie purchases at Victoria's Secret? Another silence. I want to come home, she said finally. We need to discuss this face to face. Your things are packed and waiting in the garage. You can pick them up any time. Eddie, you can't just throw me out of my own house. Actually, I can. The house is in my name, remember? You insisted on keeping your maiden name for professional reasons, so you never got added to the deed. I could hear her breathing getting faster. You can't do this to me. Watch me. I hung up and turned my phone off. Then I poured myself a glass of whiskey and began planning my next move. Wednesday brought the first real counterattack. I was at work, troubleshooting a network issue for one of our biggest clients, when my boss called me into his office. Eddie, we need to talk. Jim Morrison had been running Morrison Tech Solutions for 15 years, and he looked uncomfortable as he gestured for me to sit down. What's up, Jim? I got a call this morning from Alison. She's concerned about your mental state. I kept my expression neutral. Is she? She says you've been acting erratically, making threats, harassing her friends, spreading lies about her online. Have you seen any evidence of me spreading lies online? Jim shifted in his chair. Well, no, but she seemed very upset. She mentioned that you might be having some kind of breakdown. Jim, you've known me for 8 years. Have I ever acted unprofessionally? Ever missed work due to mental health issues? Ever done anything to make you question my stability? No, but my wife is having an affair. I found out about it this weekend, and I asked her to move out of our house. That's not a breakdown, Jim. That's a reasonable response to betrayal. Jim looked relieved. So, you're not planning to do anything dramatic? Define dramatic. You know what I mean, Eddie. Sometimes when marriages fall apart, people do things they regret. I stood up and straightened my tie. The only thing I regret is not figuring out what she was up to sooner. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. But Alison's call to my boss was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I discovered that she'd been busy. She'd called my mother, my sister, even my old boxing coach from the gym where I still worked out occasionally. The story was always the same. Eddie was having a breakdown. Eddie was acting unstable. Eddie needed help. It was a smart strategy, I had to admit. If she could convince everyone that I was the problem, it would deflect attention from her own behavior. Unfortunately for Alison, I was smarter. I started with documentation, screenshots of every message, every email, every social media post. I organized them into folders on my computer, creating a timeline of her affair that was impossible to dispute. Then I made copies. Lots of copies. I mailed one set to her boss at the law firm, along with a polite note explaining that I thought he should know that his employee was using company resources to conduct personal business. The hotel receipts I'd found showed that several of her rendezvous with Bryce had taken place during work hours. Another set went to the State Bar Association with a complaint about ethical violations. Lawyers were supposed to maintain certain standards of conduct, and adultery could be grounds for disciplinary action. The third set I saved for later. Thursday evening, I was at Mickey's gym, working off my frustration on the heavy bag, when my old friend Mike Sullivan found me. "Heard you're going through a rough patch," he said, wrapping his hands for his own workout. "News travels fast in this town. Alison came by yesterday, wanted to talk to me about you." I stopped punching and looked at him. "What did she say?" "Same thing she's been telling everyone else, that you're not handling the separation well, that she's worried about what you might do." "And what did you tell her?" Mike grinned. "I told her that if she was really worried about what you might do, maybe she shouldn't have been screwing around with Bryce Carter in the first place. You always were a good friend. Speaking of Bryce, you know he's been coming in here lately? Trying to bulk up, I guess. Guy's got no technique, but he talks a big game." This was interesting. "What kind of big game?" "Oh, you know, how he's going to take Alison away from her loser husband, how he's got big plans for making money, how he's going to show her what a real man can do." I felt that familiar twist in my chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else, something that felt like anticipation. "Mike, do me a favor. Next time Bryce comes in, give me a call." "You planning something?" "Nothing dramatic. I just want to have a conversation." Friday morning brought the school's annual fundraising breakfast, an event that Alison and I had attended together for the past 5 years. Our daughters, Maya and Emily, would be expecting both of us to show up. I arrived early and found a table near the back of the gymnasium. The place was packed with families, teachers, and local business owners, all gathered to support the school's music program. Alison walked in 20 minutes later, and she wasn't alone. Bryce Carter followed her through the door like a faithful puppy, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. They were dressed like they were attending a country club event rather than an elementary school breakfast, and they made quite the entrance. I watched as heads turned and conversations stopped. This was Millfield, Massachusetts, population 8,000, where everyone knew everyone else's business. Bringing her lover to a school function wasn't just bold, it was stupid. They found seats near the front, close to where Maya and Emily were sitting with their classmates. I could see my daughters' confused expressions as they tried to process what they were seeing. The principal, Mrs. Davidson, began her presentation about the music program's needs and accomplishments. I half listened, more interested in watching the crowd's reaction to Alison and Bryce's public display. During the break between presentations, I made my move. I walked over to their table, carrying my coffee cup and wearing my most pleasant smile. "Morning, Allie. Bryce." Alison's face went pale. "Eddie, I didn't know you were coming." "Wouldn't miss it. You know how much I care about the girls' education." Bryce leaned back in his chair, trying to look casual. "Hey there, Eddie. How's it going?" "Oh, you know, learning new things every day. For instance, I learned that sunscreen isn't the only thing you're good at applying." The couple at the next table stopped their conversation and turned to stare. "Eddie," Alison hissed. "Not here." "Why not here?" "I thought you were proud of your relationship. Otherwise, why bring him to a school function?" Bryce's jaw tightened. "Look, man, I think you need to calm down." "I'm perfectly calm. In fact, I'm having a great morning. Oh, by the way, Bryce, how are things going with Tony Marconi? I heard you two have been having some interesting conversations lately." The color drained from Bryce's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Something about a loan that's coming due? Tony's not known for his patience with late payments." I pulled out my phone and pretended to check a message. "Actually, I think I have Tony's number here somewhere. Maybe I should give him a call, let him know where to find you." "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." Alison grabbed my arm. "Eddie, stop this. You're making a scene." I looked around at the faces staring at us. Parents, teachers, even some of the older students had turned to watch our little drama unfold. "You're right," I said. "This isn't the place for family discussions." I started to walk away, then turned back as if I'd just remembered something. "Oh, and Bryce, you might want to check your phone. I think you got a message." His hand went automatically to his pocket, and as he pulled out his phone, it slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. The screen lit up as it hit the ground, displaying a text message thread that was visible to everyone within 10 feet. Can't wait to see you tonight. Room 237 again? I already booked it. Bring that red thing I like. B. What if Eddie finds out? Let me worry about your husband. B. The silence that followed was deafening. Bryce scrambled to pick up his phone, but the damage was done. Half the room had seen the messages, and the other half would hear about them within the hour. I walked away whistling, leaving Alison and Bryce to deal with the stares and whispers that followed. The fallout from the school breakfast was swift and brutal. By Saturday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook with calls from friends, neighbors, and people I barely knew, all wanting to know if what they'd heard was true. I confirmed nothing and denied nothing. I simply listened sympathetically as person after person expressed their shock and disappointment at Alison's behavior. I always thought she was such a devoted wife, said Carol Henderson. Those poor children, added Betty Moore, and at a school function, too. Shameless, clucked Mrs. Harris. But the real damage came from an unexpected source. Jenny Morse called me Saturday afternoon, and her voice was different, colder. Eddie, we need to talk. About what? About the game you're playing, and about what I know. She suggested we meet at Rosie's Diner, a little place on the outskirts of town where the coffee was strong and the booths offered privacy. I arrived first and chose a corner table where I could see the door. Jenny walked in 10 minutes later, looking nothing like the bubbly socialite I'd known for years. Her smile was gone, replaced by something calculating and dangerous. You've been busy, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Have I? Don't play dumb, Eddie. The school thing was clever, I'll give you that, but you're not the only one who knows how to dig up dirt. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was grainy and dark, but I could make out two figures in what looked like a hotel room. Recognize anyone? She asked. I studied the image more carefully. One of the figures was definitely Alison. The other was male, but it wasn't Bryce. Who is he? Judge Patterson's son, the one who's married to the mayor's daughter, the one who's been handling some of Allie's legal cases lately. My stomach dropped. If this photo was real, it meant Alison's infidelity went deeper than I'd realized. What do you want, Jenny? I want you to back off. Stop the campaign against Ali, stop embarrassing Bryce, and maybe this photo stays private. And if I don't? Then everyone finds out that your wife isn't just a cheater. She's been trading favors for favorable legal decisions. That's a federal offense, Eddie. Prison time. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. Something about this felt wrong. The timing, the convenient blackmail material, the way Jenny had suddenly become Alison's protector. How long have you had this? Does it matter? It matters to me. See, I've been doing some digging of my own lately. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. I pulled out my own phone and showed her a bank statement. Recognize this account number? Jenny's confident expression faltered slightly. It's yours, I continued, from 3 years ago, right around the time I fired you from Morrison Tech for embezzling client funds. That was never proven. No, it wasn't, because I felt sorry for you. Single mother struggling to make ends meet. I thought I was being merciful by just letting you go instead of pressing charges. What's your point? My point is that you've been planning this for 3 years. You wormed your way into Alison's social circle, became her best friend, and then you orchestrated this whole thing. Jenny's mask finally slipped completely. The sweet, bubbly socialite disappeared, replaced by something cold and vicious. You destroyed my life, she said quietly. Do you have any idea what it's like to be branded as a thief in a town this size? I couldn't get a job anywhere. I had to move in with my mother. My son had to change schools because of the gossip. So you decided to destroy mine. I decided to give you a taste of your own medicine. How does it feel, Eddie? How does it feel to have everyone in town talking about you? To have your reputation in ruins? The difference is I didn't do anything wrong. You stole money from clients. Alison cheated on her husband. Actions have consequences. You self-righteous piece of garbage. You think you're so much better than everyone else. I leaned back in the booth, studying her face. How did you do it? How did you convince Alison to have the affair? It wasn't hard. She was already unhappy, already feeling trapped in her marriage to a small-town computer geek. I just introduced her to Bryce and let nature take its course. And the photo? The one with Judge Patterson's son? Jenny smiled, and it was ugly. Photoshop is a wonderful thing. Amazing what you can do with the right software and a little creativity. So it's fake. Of course it's fake. But it looks real enough, doesn't it? And in a town like this, perception is reality. I nodded slowly. You're right about that. I stood up and dropped a $10 bill on the table. Where are you going? She asked. To end this. Eddie, wait. We can work something out. I don't really want to hurt Ali. I just wanted you to understand what it felt like. I understand perfectly. But you made one mistake, Jenny. What's that? You assumed I was the same person I was 3 years ago. The guy who felt sorry for you. The guy who let things slide to avoid confrontation. I leaned down so that my face was level with hers. I'm not that guy anymore. Sunday morning, I drove to Jenny's salon. It was closed, but I knew she'd be there doing inventory and preparing for the week ahead. She was nothing if not dedicated to maintaining her image as a successful businesswoman. I parked across the street and waited. Sure enough, her car was in the back lot, and I could see lights on in the main salon area. I'd spent Saturday night putting together a comprehensive file on Jenny Morse, bank records, employment history, even her son's school records. The picture that emerged was of a woman who'd been struggling financially for years, long before I'd fired her. The embezzlement hadn't been a moment of weakness. It had been part of a pattern of financial fraud that stretched back to her previous jobs. I'd just been the first employer to catch her, but more importantly, I'd found evidence of her real relationship with Bryce Carter. They'd been involved romantically for over a year, long before he'd started pursuing Alison. The whole thing had been an elaborate setup from the beginning. I walked across the street and knocked on the salon's front door. Jenny appeared a moment later, looking surprised to see me. We're closed, she said through the glass. I know. I wanted to talk to you privately. She hesitated, then unlocked the door. Make it quick. I have things to do. The salon was a monument to Jenny's vanity. Mirrors everywhere, expensive equipment, and photos of satisfied customers covering the walls. It must have cost a fortune to set up, which raised the question of where she'd gotten the money. Nice place, I said. Must have been expensive. I worked hard for this. I'm sure you did, though I'm curious about the financing. Your credit was pretty much destroyed after the embezzlement thing, so traditional bank loans would have been difficult. I had investors. Investors? Like Bryce Carter? Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Bryce has been struggling with debt for months. Tony Marconi isn't his only creditor. But somehow he found enough money to invest in your salon. Interesting timing. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken the night before. It was Bryce's car parked outside her apartment building at 2 a.m. You and Bryce have been together this whole time, haven't you? The affair with Alison was just a way to hurt me, but it was also supposed to be temporary. Once you'd gotten your revenge and Bryce had gotten whatever he wanted from Alison, he'd come back to you. Jenny sank into one of the salon chairs. You don't understand. You ruined everything for me. So, you decided to ruin everything for me. But you got greedy. You wanted to hurt Alison too, didn't you? Because she had everything you wanted. The successful career, the nice house, the respect of the community. She looked down on me. They all did. Like I was some kind of charity case. So you manipulated her into an affair that would destroy her marriage and her reputation. And you convinced Bryce to go along with it by promising him access to Alison's money and connections. It would have worked if you hadn't been so stubborn. You were supposed to just accept it and move on. Most men would have. Most men aren't married to lawyers. Most men don't have access to the kind of digital forensics tools that I do. I showed her another photo on my phone. This one was a bank transfer record showing a payment from Bryce's account to hers, dated just 2 days after Alison's first hotel receipt. He was paying you to seduce my wife, and you were paying him to go along with it. Quite the business arrangement. What do you want, Eddie? Money? I'll pay you whatever you want. I don't want money. I want the truth. What truth? I want you to tell Alison what you did. I want you to tell her that her best friend has been manipulating her for 3 years, that her lover has been playing her for a fool, that the whole thing was an elaborate revenge plot. She'll never believe it. She will when I show her the evidence. Bank records, phone logs, even security camera footage from the hotel where you and Bryce met to plan this whole thing. Jenny stared at me in shock. You've been watching us? I've been investigating you. There's a difference. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. And I will. The question is whether you want to maintain some dignity by telling the truth, or whether you want me to expose everything publicly. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the salon mirror. What happens to me if I tell her? That's between you and Alison. But I imagine she's going to be pretty angry when she finds out her best friend has been manipulating her. And if I don't? Then tomorrow morning, everyone in town gets an email with copies of all the evidence I've gathered. Bank records, photos, phone logs, everything. Your reputation, what's left of it, will be completely destroyed. You're just as vindictive as I am. No, Jenny, I'm just better at it. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Jenny? You might want to call Bryce and let him know the game is over, because my next stop is Tony Marconi's car lot, and I have a feeling Tony would be very interested to know about Bryce's recent financial activities. I left her sitting in the salon chair, staring at her reflection and probably wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Monday evening, I sent out invitations to a small gathering at the old lakeside cabin that Alison and I had rented for weekend getaways during happier times. The cabin belonged to an old client of mine who owed me a favor, and he was happy to let me use it for one last meeting. I invited Alison, Bryce, and Jenny. The message was simple. Time to clear the air. Come alone. Alison arrived first, looking nervous and confused. She'd aged years in the past week, and her usual polished appearance had given way to something more fragile. Eddie, what is this about? Why did you want to meet here? Patience. We're waiting for the others. What others? Bryce's car pulled up before I could answer. He climbed out slowly, his usual confidence replaced by obvious anxiety. The golden boy looked tarnished, and I could see the stress in his face. This better be important, he said as he walked up to the cabin. I've got things to do. I'm sure you do, like figuring out how to pay Tony Marconi before he decides to collect in other ways. Bryce's face went white. What do you know about Tony? I know he's not a patient man. I also know that you're 3 weeks behind on your payments. Jenny's car appeared on the access road, moving slowly as if she was reluctant to complete the journey. She parked next to Bryce's car but didn't get out immediately. Is that Jenny? Alison asked. Why is she here? Because this story involves all of you. When Jenny finally joined us on the cabin's front porch, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. None of them would meet each other's eyes, and I realized that they all suspected what was coming. Let's go inside, I said. We have a lot to discuss. The cabin was small but comfortable, with a main room dominated by a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the lake. I'd set up a laptop on the dining table, connected to a portable projector that cast its light onto the white wall above the fireplace. What's all this? Alison asked. A presentation. I call it Sunscreen, Secrets and Betrayal, the Real Story. I clicked the first slide, which showed a timeline stretching back 3 years. Let me start at the beginning. 3 years ago, I fired Jenny from Morrison Tech for embezzling client funds. It was a difficult decision, but the evidence was clear. Eddie, please, Jenny said. We don't need to rehash old history. Actually, we do, because that's where this whole thing started. The next slide showed bank records and employment applications. After I fired her, Jenny had trouble finding work. Her reputation in town was damaged, and she blamed me for ruining her life. So she decided to get revenge. I clicked to the next slide, which showed photos of Jenny and Alison at various social events. She spent 2 years working her way into Alison's social circle. She became her best friend, her confidant, the person Alison turned to when she was feeling frustrated with her marriage. Alison was staring at the screen in shock. That's not... Jenny, tell him that's not true. Jenny said nothing. The next step was finding someone to seduce you. Enter Bryce Carter, struggling realtor with a gambling problem and a mountain of debt. The next slide showed bank transfers between Jenny and Bryce's accounts. Jenny offered Bryce a deal. She'd help him financially if he'd help her destroy my marriage. All he had to do was make my wife fall in love with him. This is insane, Bryce said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Let's look at the evidence. I clicked through a series of slides showing hotel receipts, text messages, and photos. The timeline was clear and damning. The affair wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, orchestrated, and financed. Every hotel room, every romantic dinner, every gift, it was all part of an elaborate revenge plot. Alison was crying now, staring at Jenny with a mixture of hurt and rage. How could you do this to me? I trusted you. Ali, I can explain, Jenny started. Explain what? That you used me to hurt my husband? That you destroyed my marriage for revenge? Your marriage was already broken. I just helped you see it. By manipulating me into an affair with a man who was only pretending to care about me. Bryce stood up abruptly. I wasn't pretending anything. What we had was real. Was it? I clicked to the next slide, which showed a series of text messages between Bryce and Jenny, because these messages tell a different story. The texts were brutal in their honesty. Bryce complaining about having to play the romantic with Alison, Jenny coaching him on what to say and do, both of them laughing about how easy it was to manipulate her. You were never anything more than a mark to them, I told Alison gently. A way to get back at me. Alison collapsed into a chair, sobbing. My career, my reputation, my children, you destroyed everything. Your husband destroyed everything, Jenny snapped. I just gave him a taste of his own medicine. No, I said quietly. You gave him an education. I clicked to the final slide, which showed a single sentence. Actions have consequences. 3 years ago, I caught you stealing, and I fired you. That was a consequence of your actions. You decided to get revenge by destroying my marriage. That was your choice. But every choice has consequences, and now it's time for yours. I closed the laptop and looked at each of them in turn. Jenny, I've already sent copies of all this evidence to the State Bar Association, along with a complaint about your involvement in corrupting a legal professional. I've also sent copies to the IRS, since you failed to report the income from your arrangement with Bryce. Bryce, I had an interesting conversation with Tony Marconi this afternoon. He was very interested to learn about your recent financial activities. He's expecting full payment by Friday, or he'll be taking alternative collection methods. And Alison, I looked at my wife of 14 years, the mother of my children, the woman who had shared my bed and my dreams. I've filed for divorce. The papers will be served tomorrow. Eddie, please, she whispered. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. No, we can't, because this wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. You chose to believe that I wasn't good enough for you. You chose to listen to Jenny's poison. You chose to betray our marriage and humiliate me in front of our friends. I walked to the door and opened it. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the lake, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. You wanted to see what would happen if you pushed me too far. Well, now you know. I looked back at the three of them one last time. Jenny was staring at her hands, finally understanding that her revenge had backfired spectacularly. Bryce was pale and shaking, probably calculating how many days he had before Tony came looking for him, and Alison was crying, mourning the life she'd thrown away for a lie. "Enjoy cleaning up the mess you made," I said, and walked out into the storm. Behind me, I could hear voices rising in anger and accusation as they turned on each other. But I didn't look back. I had won, completely and utterly, and now I was going home to figure out what came next. The rain was falling harder now, washing the air clean. I drove through the dark streets of Millfield, past the houses where people I'd known for years were probably already hearing about the evening's revelations. By morning, the whole town would know the truth. Jenny's reputation would be destroyed, Bryce would be ruined financially and socially, and Alison would be left to pick up the pieces of the life she'd demolished. As for me, I was free. Free from a marriage built on lies, free from people who had never valued what I brought to their lives, free to start over on my own terms. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house that was finally, truly mine. Tomorrow I would call Maya and Emily and begin the difficult process of rebuilding our relationship. I would focus on my work, my health, and my future. But tonight, I was going to pour myself a drink and savor the sweet taste of perfect revenge. I had learned something important about myself over the past week. I was much stronger than anyone had given me credit for, including myself. And I was much more dangerous when cornered than my enemies had realized. They had wanted to see what would happen if they pushed the quiet computer guy too far. Now they knew.